Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Next Level Healing. I'm your host, Dr. Tara Perry, and I'd like to ask you, what does 30 years of shamanic practice and management of $1 billion in assets reveal about the intersection of money, energy, and meaning? Well, you're about to find out. My guest today is Sylvia Solit. Sylvia bridges the worlds of high finance and spiritual healing like few others. She holds a CFA charter and is also an indigenously trained shaman. She advises power brokers, CEOs, and seekers alike. As a former co founder of the Oasis Institute and chief investment officer for family offices, she's managed over $1 billion in assets and specializes in early stage investing and litigation funding. With decades of training in healing, especially in psychedelic assisted therapies, Sylvia's work unites consciousness and capital to catalyze social transformation. Sylvia has spoken at MAPS, Davos, and hosted fireside chats with cultural icons like Mike Tyson. Known for her energetic precision and insight, she advises boards, reads energy and people and places, and helps visionaries align strategy with soul. Wow. Welcome,
Thank
Sylvia.
you. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here today.
Mind-blowing combination of, skills. What is the crossover between investing and the spirituality of shamanism? How do they complement each other? How do they come together?
In the beginning, it wasn't necessarily shamanism, it was more awakening or consciousness. So, the first 10 years of sort of my adult life, I studied to be a healer. And what I was most interested in was just what does it mean to heal? Can an ordinary human wake up? What does awakening mean in today's day and age? And I kind of started to get close to understanding by the time I was in my late 20s that really, like, I don't really know what other purpose there could be to being a human other than you're here to learn how to wake up. And it was so viscerally clear to me that all of life was this design for awakening. And so then that meant to me that healing in its very core is really the question of awakening
And
because
and what was it that did that for you? Was it a psychedelic journey? Was it, what was the take us to that moment where all of a sudden the
sure. The first moment was with a psychedelic. It was an accidental overdose of psilocybin mushrooms. I was a freshman in college. I never drank. I didn't smoke weed. I was like a total geek. I like played the violin. I was like not into any of this kind of stuff. But a couple of months after I arrived at university, somebody that I'd become friends with actually went and picked psilocybin out in the wild and brought it back for a group of friends to experiment with. This is also pre-internet. We didn't have any books to reference. We didn't have anything to look up in terms of safety or set and setting. People weren't talking about psychedelics. But he had had some experience because his parents were these sort of like old school hippies from Gainesville, Florida. And so he kind of knew what he was doing. And we were young and dumb enough to just eat a big handful of them without thinking much past the consequences of doing that. And then we did what teenagers do, which is we decided to walk to a party. And as we were walking to the party, the mushrooms began to take effect. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I just looked up at this beautiful tree in front of me, and I was so struck by just the gift of the universe. I could just feel the beauty of the universe so clearly. And then I was like, why do we ever like not just be completely natural? Why do we ever like hold anything back? And then I was wearing jeans and I just literally peed through my jeans while looking at this tree. So I was really, really, really high on mushrooms. I was not like that was not a microdose. That was a very, very strong dose. If I had to guess, knowing what I know today, I probably took over 5 grams that day. And
Wow.
with obviously no preparation at all. But what was magical is then once we got to the party, I was sitting there and I had the first experience of seeing that every single thing that I thought unfolded in what would happen in reality. And it was just I was having an actual direct experience that I would think something and it would just unfold in the 3D, and I would think something else and it would unfold in
Wow.
the 3D. And again, no preparation for that. At some point, the party became overwhelming for me because that was so much input into my system. So my boyfriend and I then walked down to the bay, and as we were walking to the bay, I saw a frog that was on its sort of last legs. It was a frog that was, going to die shortly thereafter I found it, and it was hovering in between life and death. And that was sort of the final transmission of the mushrooms where it just blasted me like to infinity, where it said, your form identity, this body is temporary. And beyond that is this thing called the soul. And it just blasted me as I'm looking at this frog. I just got blasted into a million pieces. Like I felt all of the teenage identity that I had just like burned, like incinerated like a paper doll, and in its place was this, very uncomfortable experience of infinity and realizing that the soul is infinite and that the person called Sylvia is not infinite and will die just like that frog. So that was quite an initiation. It was um, difficult to integrate, to be honest, which is why I don't advise that people replicate things like that. The way that I did try to integrate it was, the next morning I biked to the bookstore and I pulled the book off the shelf that appealed to me the most, and it was called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind,
Right.
Suzuki Roshi's book. And that was my first spiritual book. And that book started to teach me meditation. And then, not more than 6 months later, I met my first spiritual teacher. But that, so psychedelics were a part of that early awakening, but they were never central to the awakening itself because, again, now today we're in this psychedelic renaissance where people are doing ceremonies and healings at a relatively frequent pace. This is not the case back then. Like, you had an experience like that, you may not have another one for 2 more years, maybe 3 more years. Like, integration took me a long, long time. And so the psychedelics they're a consciousness tool, but they are not the only nor the primary force of awakening. The primary force of awakening is our own willingness and ability to ask the question, well, who am I? And what's the purpose of my human lifetime?
Hey guys, studies are showing that 68% of people that watch podcasts regularly don't click the subscribe button. Do me a huge favor. If you like this content, click subscribe so other people know where to go for the cool stuff. Thank you. So, if somebody thinks that they need a guru or a religion in order to have awakening, how do you respond to that?
I think that time is coming to an end. There was a time when I really believed in the importance of the teacher and the transmission of the teacher. I myself have had consistent same teachers for decades. My experience in today's world is that that model is beginning to shift. One is we've seen that there's so few teachers that are actually carrying a full transmission of awakening. A lot of them are carrying partial transmission, so they can be very awake in some ways and not in others, which is how you end up with teachers that give great talks but then are having sex with students behind closed doors. These are not fully awakened beings, which is by no means is a criticism. I myself do not consider myself to be a fully awakened being, but it's knowing that that is healthy. It's knowing that I still have identity in some of these pockets that are really difficult for us to fully wake up. It's healthy to know that you just have a piece of the puzzle and to not put yourself on a pedestal as a teacher above others. And so I think that we're beginning to evolve in our understanding of the limitations of the teacher, and that there's a flattening of that kind of hierarchy in spirituality and awakening. I think that awakening is quickening on the planet in a way where what's really coming to the forefront is the power of the community. So I think community is the new guru. It's our ability to be mirrors to each other to be authentic with each other and to hold each other not just accountable, but to hold each other in connection so that we don't feel isolated and alone. That I think is quickly becoming the new guru.
Beautiful. Um, where did you get your feet wet with finance and, managing money? How on earth did you get involved with managing over $1 billion worth in assets? Did that happen before the awakening, after the awakening? Uh, take us back to when that started to integrate.
Yeah, it was after I was completely financially illiterate until I was in my late 20s. I never ever thought about money at all. And in fact, money felt like something that was not my domain. I was I would, meet somebody who had money and to me it was like they felt like an alien from a very far away planet. I thought, wow, like I wonder what it's like to live that existence because I was not interested in money and it wasn't a focus for me for all those years. It was really in, my late 20s, um, I went to India, for an extended pilgrimage. I was living in India for a few months, and I had a really profound awakening experience in India, with a teacher, and that was one of the deepest experiences of awakening I've had in my lifetime, and it took, like, a few weeks for that to begin to integrate. Like, I was so blasted open by it that I couldn't even like, I didn't feel identified with Sylvia at all for, like, 2 weeks. I was complete she was, like, completely gone from my consciousness, and as that awakening began to integrate, these this guidance started to come in for me that was like, we can't have, you know, beings that are interested in truth and awakening. We don't want you living in India apart from the West and apart from the structures of power. It's really useful if you could actually choose to be in your cultural paradigm and actually touch into these realms that usually are not touched by awakening. Because again, similar to how I think that the guru of yesterday is becoming the community of today, and that hierarchies of awakening are flattening, and that the points of access are there's a multitude of points of access to awakening today compared to what there were 30 years ago. Similarly, we need awakening to infiltrate money, sex, and power. It's just really important that we figure that out as a human race. We can't keep them divided forever. It's dangerous.
Talk more about that. What is the connection between money, sex, and power? How what is what does an enlightened approach to these issues look like? You mentioned community, but paint a picture for us of what that looks like.
I would also maybe offer the word sobriety. We think of sobriety as something that's again the domain of addicts and the domain of substances. But my experience is that we're living in a culture of addiction to, I mean, so many things are countless. We're addicted to distraction. We're addicted to social media. We're addicted to busyness. We're in a very addictive field as a culture. And the reason why I think that sobriety is an important word to put inside of this framework is if you look at classic 12 step AA work, what you're doing is you're not letting anything else be a higher power. That's why God or the divine always has a central part of a 12-step process is you're actually reorganizing your energetic priority to not put that thing above the divine. You give the divine or the mystery or whatever the God of your understanding is, you give it its rightful place as the sovereign, supreme master of consciousness and of life. And when it comes to the domains of money and sex and power, these are what humans have the hardest time putting in rightful relationship to the divine. And so money is, I'd say, arguably much more of a god for many people than the divine itself is. Power is so intoxicating. It can You can put power as your end game and your goal instead of the divine. And with sex, there's been a it's just a lot there's sex is a whole other topic, which I'm happy to go into, but sex has in many ways been um its its full potential and its full possibility is very, very limited in our culture right now because we are using sex transactionally often as opposed to transformationally. And so money, sex, and power are areas that I think are incredibly ripe for awakening.
So how would somebody know if their relationship was transactional versus spiritual? What would be um markers of that? I mean, I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, most people, they're looking for a good deal, they're looking for somebody that's gonna elevate them in some way, so that's very transactional. Um, can you describe, what somebody might do if they wanted to attract a more spiritual relationship? Who would they need to become? And if somebody wanted to perhaps elevate the relationship that they're currently in, what would your advice be to them?
I would start with setting some intentions, or if it feels natural to you, even beginning to pray in a particular way around that. And that guidance comes from my own direct experience when I was I'm divorced and now remarried, but in that period where I was, alone and a single mother, I was asking myself that question, what, how do I choose? Like, what am I looking for? And I was in a very deep period of training with an ayahuasca tribe from Colombia. So I was drinking quite a bit of ayahuasca at this time in my life because I was training. And in those ceremonies, which were really like quite profound, deep ceremonies, I was asking that question, how do I not be transactional? Like, what am I supposed to do around relationship? And the teaching that was given to me directly was that if you want your life to be about awakening, then you make that prayer complete and total. You don't hold anything outside of that prayer. And that takes courage. So for a long time, I said, I want to wake up as deeply as I can in this lifetime. But it took me until recently to be able to say, I want to wake up as deeply as I can in this lifetime at any cost, even if that means being alone. So the guidance was if we can put it all on the altar and say, I'm actually my first and foremost goal is awakening, then what happens is the universe hears that. It's like an incredible order taker. And I always like to think of the universe as like a waitress in a diner who has an incredible menu and she's just waiting there with her, little notepad at wondering what you'd like. And when you say, I want awakening no matter what, then the universe gets to respond to that. And what I was shown is that then it said to me, your needs don't actually matter. It's not about having your needs met. Like, you don't even really exist. Like, you're just consciousness. It's about what serves the universe's needs to unfold awakening on the planet. And so if it serves our design, if it serves consciousness's design for you to be partnered, because that partnership will amplify your collective work in the world, then you will be partnered. And if it serves the universe's needs that you're alone to lift consciousness in the world, then you'll be alone. So you just surrender. But that's a very deep prayer, but that removes all transactional frequency out of your field completely and forever. And it's incredibly liberating.
Beautiful. Ah, so beautiful. What do you think the biggest mistakes people are making? Why is there so much stress, anxiety, unhappiness, lack of fulfillment?
Well, I think it's being exacerbated by how fragmented our attention is. Um, I think we've underestimated the impact of the modern life. It's like it's so we are our attention is pulled in so many directions, so many times a day, and I don't know how we can retrieve peaceful consciousness when our attention is pulled so much. So I think that one of the number one reasons why we're so plagued with, anxiety, depression, all kinds of, mental like suffering, the number one thing is we haven't curated our attention. And I know not everyone is a natural meditator. I have done periods of meditation, but I'm not a natural meditator either. So I find my meditation through dance, or I find my meditation through walking, or I find my meditation through my garden. But it's really important that we begin to retrieve just that sense of being able to be with ourselves without being distracted.
Beautiful. Love that. So how you had these enlightening experiences and you wanted to interact with. May I ask who your teacher was in India that opened up the doors for you?
Yeah, so I was at the ashram of Ramana Maharshi.
Okay.
Ramana
Yeah.
Maharshi is one of the great sages of India. He died in 1950, but he was the first or one of the first teachers to really begin to teach publicly what's called today Advaita Vedanta.
Yeah.
So is this is sort of the one of the more um, later parts of the Vedas, and it was the part that teaches that you're not separate from anything. It's the non-dual teachings. And so I was in his ashram when this happened.
So it wasn't with him though, it was another teacher at the time.
That's correct. He's no longer in the body, and, when you stay at the ashram, they actually encourage you to not go and see other teachers, which is interesting. There's this whole, sort of cat and mouse game at the ashram because if you're staying there, they want you to be just as they should be. I mean, it's a limited space in the ashram, so they want you to be very focused on just being in meditation and prayer and devotion to Ramana as a spirit guide, essentially, not in form. But because, that ashram attracts so many spiritual seekers, and because that town has become kind of renowned for the pilgrims, you have an incredible amount of really great spiritual teachers that end up there every December, January, and February. And I was staying in the ashram, and it would always be this kind of thing where you'd be like, "Okay, can I sneak out of the gates of the ashram to go sit with a different spiritual teacher?" And and basically, you're not supposed to, and I really didn't do it that much because I didn't wanna get caught. Because it's quite an honor to be able to stay in the ashram. However, one day somebody came to me and said, "Well, there's this teacher, and he's staying in the ashram, so you didn't have to leave the gates." And she said, "You should come and hang out with us, this afternoon." And so I did, and I it was is incredible because I put on like a fresh sari. I went and got some fruit from the fruit stand nearby to offer to him, and I walked into this room, and his name is was I think he still is alive. His name was Brahman, and he was dressed in orange, like a sadhu, a spiritual seeker, or in India. And I sat at the front of the room, and he looked at me, and he just with these piercing eyes, and he said, "Why are you here?" That was the first line. And I said, "To wake up." And he used what I could only describe as kind of a Socratic method, like a spiritually informed Socratic method. He kept asking me questions. And if I think it was probably like 45 minutes that he was continued just like with piercing gaze, just kept asking question after question after question after question until finally my mind for the first time completely surrendered. I realized it had met its master. And and then next thing I know, I felt the divine feminine goddess just completely, take over my body, and then I was looking at him, but I was the divine goddess looking at him, so we switched roles where I gave him the darshan of the divine feminine, and as I was looking in his eyes, I said to him, um, I said, "I'm going to eat you now." 'Cause it wasn't me, it was, like, Kali. I was just observing it happening, it was wild, and I really I honor and give thanks to that man to this day for helping me to walk through those doors.
Wow. That's an amazing, beautiful spiritual awakening. How did you walk the pathway of getting into money and finance after that? How did that work? And how did you keep the spirituality as part of that? Because we typically think of those areas as very devoid of spiritual meaning.
Yeah, in the beginning, I was really just learning the business. I mean, I was trying to be in the business with integrity, but I was really learning the business. So when I returned from that trip to India, I was able to get hired as a financial advisor. They had a program called Pathways that took entrepreneurs and trained them to be financial advisors. And during my 20s, I helped to build this business in South America, the Oasis Institute. So I was technically considered an entrepreneur. And so I was trained to be a financial advisor in a bank. And in the beginning, I was really just getting my licenses, and I I remember the first time I invested. I remember exactly who I made my first investment for. I remember the family. I remember exactly what I did for them. And I stayed up all night long hoping I made the right trades. I just really, I took it very seriously, the duty to be responsible for somebody's capital. But those kinds of jobs, they have sales goals, and I didn't really like the fact that I had to sell to be able to advise. And I slowly began to understand I was going to have to get trained at a much higher level to be out of that kind of a role. Financial advisors is a pretty low barrier to entry to do that job. And so that's what made me then go and do my CFA charter, because there's not a lot of women. I think today maybe there's like maybe 12, 15,000 women in the world who have it. It's not that many. It's hard. So I went and got that to really have like the best training possible in managing money. And then that's what then gave me access and ability to do portfolio management for family offices.
Beautiful. Wow. And what's it like interacting? People must be, I mean, are they pleasantly surprised when they find out the spiritual side of you, or did they find you because of the spiritual side of you? How did that begin? Did you just start interacting with people on a financial basis and then they found out you had this different perspective of honoring the divine first? Um,
Well, for I mean, it wasn't a direct trajectory. I had to really like earn my place in the financial world first. You can't blend if you don't have master level. You don't want to. I don't. You don't. The thing is that you have to you have to kind of really have a plan around what you're doing, because you don't want to look woo, because it diminishes the power of what's possible here. And so it took me a really long time to feel confident and capacitated to do that. I really only started to bring those things together about 8, 9 years ago, where I finally felt like I could truly begin to have that as a unified conversation. And even then, I've had my hardest lessons and my biggest failures have been in the past 8 or 9 years, because like this is not this is not like such an obvious thing to be doing out there. And I'm happy to share some of those failures, but like it hasn't been that easy to bring them together. Um and I would say it's really now only in like the past 2 to 3 years that I feel like I finally now have hit my stride. And now anyone that's working with me, this is upfront and it's obvious, and anyone who wants to work with me is going to work with me because this is what they're looking for. It's not separated in my life at all anymore.
So have people come to you because they were very successful, did well, but felt like something was missing, and they were grateful to find somebody who was able to bridge those 2? Or is there another picture that I'm missing?
Right now, developing a specific curriculum with a family office consulting firm. So there's a very kind of revolutionary consulting firm out there that is sort of with me pioneering this work for family offices. And so we're developing a kind of process, an actual proprietary process for people that are stewards of wealth, who are looking specifically for this. And what I mean by looking for this, that it's the typical profile is someone who either inherited some capital, or they sold a business and they had a liquidity event. They are still relatively young. They have God willing, they have years ahead of them and they don't know what their life purpose is anymore. That's the really, like, that's the an amazing inflection point to be able to do this work with someone, because in our culture, we either revere the wealthy person, which can put the wealthy person in a kind of bubble where they don't actually get really honest feedback from anyone anymore because everyone's laughing at your jokes and everyone thinks everything you say is intelligent. Like, we have this sort of like rich person worshiping disease in America. And so all of a sudden they have money and then they have like no, then they're in an echo chamber. Um, or they have imposter syndrome, or they feel a sense of guilt or shame around the money. And what I'm really interested in is to turn that conversation around and to really ask someone, why you? Why you? Because that is a soul question. It's like adjacent to who am I? It's like the financial form of the who am I questions. Why you? Why is this invitation of stewardship in your hands? And what is your life purpose as a soul? Like when you are on your deathbed, what do you want to have fulfilled as the karmic purpose and transmission of your life? And if you can connect that soul level conversation around life purpose back to the capital, I think that that is a really powerful that's a really powerful thing to bring together for people. And then from there, like, the way that they can build companies or the way that they can invest is infused with consciousness. So you think about consciousness is a dimension that's always available to us. It's a dimension of being, but we don't have a lot of practice and we may never have even accessed that dimension of being. So we have no idea how to then use that dimension of being as a way of stewardship or building things in the world. We're just used to usually only doing it from our ego.
And without speaking, obviously with details, but can you describe, maybe some of the people that you've worked with, what it was like for them to be kind of disconnected, lost, not having a real sense of the divine or who they are, and then finding that and how their lives were different after that and the lives of other people? Because obviously if you're a steward of that amount of money, it can impact a lot of other families and a lot of lives.
The most common um, sort of person who comes this work, I would say, is, you know, late 30s to late 50s, kind of in that stage of life usually, and has sold a company, has had some kind of liquidity event, and is asking themselves that question of what am I supposed to do now? Like my raison d'être was always to do this. Now it's done. And there's this, it's like when people climb K2 or Everest and they have like a little mini depression afterwards. To like, well, what am I supposed to do after I've had the success? That particular moment is the moment that's most right for spiritual transformation. So somebody will come and do this work with me at that moment. And it's so unique what it looks like for people, but some of the overarching themes could be overwhelming sense of gratitude, tremendous gratitude, being in touch with the feeling of grace, cognizant of grace, um, open to there being a design for their life, that it wasn't just luck or random or just like I did this and then I died, but that there was this soul level design, or you could even say a soul contract that they had before they incarnated that is connected to this resource. And if you can create that experience or that knowledge for someone, or say, wow, like this, I signed up for this. And I am so grateful to be seated where I'm seated. Then from there, you'll just see people begin to use their time differently, right? How they use their time shifts radically. That's the number one thing that shifts. But again, that's the most valuable resource. And my partner in the consulting business, he always says it's funny to him when he sees people that are very wealthy, they always seem to exchange their time to get more money. And he's like, it's the worst trade on the planet because you already have an abundance of this thing called money and you don't have an abundance of time. So this kind of spiritual awakening really helps people re-engineer the use of time. That's the number one thing, number one resource that is used differently. But then just connected to that is also you see people beginning to invest differently. So a very simple example of that might be that they were maybe before they were spending a lot of time trying to figure out which fund manager can outperform which fund manager, and they wanted to be like involved in the stock market, but they're constantly saying like, "Oh, this one underperformed by 20 basis points." That like a lot of that is just it's a tremendous waste of time. And so it can even change your method by which you're investing and the amount of the kind of attention that you're paying to investing. So you begin to pay attention to what matters with investing and you stop paying attention to what doesn't matter. Like looking for outperformance in public markets really doesn't matter. Making sure that you have like a high integrity fiduciary and that your custody is, solid and that you have the right trust and estate and tax planning, that matters. So you reallocate how you're hiring and building your management teams as a result of these kinds of experiences as well. And then the third area is that you might begin to ignite like a part of your gift, which you might be able to use to help founders and entrepreneurs of startups or less developed companies in sectors where you have domain expertise. You begin to have a sort of like, I can provide capital to these kinds of founders, but I can also provide mentorship and guidance to these kinds of founders because I've been there. I know the roadmap and I'm not going to just write a check. I'm also going to provide mentoring and guidance, or maybe I'm going to be on some of these boards. I said those are some three of the big ways I see people change from doing this work as it pertains to how they look at their investing.
So, as somebody is more authentic, more enlightened, and time being the most precious thing there is, are they spending less time on figuring out how to make more money and more time? I mean, you talked about wealth preservation through taxes and things like that, but I imagine some part of them is connecting to their soul and utilizing their time to expand their soul's mission in life. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. The like I try to stay away from like I'm not gonna do things just like to make money. Like I actually would love to see a world in which like very conscious people have incredible amounts of abundance and it keeps growing because I feel like they're gonna know what to do with it. So maybe they still choose something that has a very like high potential for financial return, but they choose it for the right reasons. It's not just for the financial return. Like they might say, um, I like they can see a design in what they're doing that isn't just for the money, but is also going to create some kind of impact for either their family, their community, for a workforce. Like they begin to connect the impact and also they begin to connect the damage that certain businesses can bring, right? So I don't I certainly would never preach that everyone should just become an ESG investor, but at a certain wealth level, you really should be asking yourself, do I really want to create landfill to get more money? Right. So you do begin to have a responsibility in terms of how you invest for it to be less damaging to the planet, beneficial not just to yourself, but to the community that you serve, that you live in. That there is this sort of like aspect of impact that goes along with the capital, but that impact should be very, very intimately connected to the purpose of your soul and should feel incredibly fulfilling to you.
Do any of them just want to go off and be artists or musicians or healers or doctors or anything of that nature? Is it more uh
Yeah.
yeah?
They're buying, land in Costa Rica and setting up retreat centers and there are people out there that are doing really beautiful things with their capital. And it's I'm agnostic. I mean, people you only have one lifetime. You should really use it well. Use it for what you want to use it for.
What do you think the biggest money myths are? What is people's biggest misconceptions about money that you'd love to have them uh
I mean, the number one is this myth that you're gonna have enough one day.
Mm.
That's the biggest myth.
So if
And
somebody's feeling like they're lacking, the
yeah,
answer is not filling it with more money. That's true with any addiction, isn't it? That you can never fill
that's
the
true with
hole.
anything. You
Yeah.
can't fill the hole with more.
Whether it's shopping,
Yeah.
sex, drugs, whatever, you're never gonna fill it with the substance because
Yeah.
it's a
There's no
filling in
there's
here.
no enough. I have worked with people who have 8,000,000, 80,000,000, 800,000,000, 8,000,000,000, and even sometimes billionaires are afraid of not having enough. And
Yeah.
so to know that's the biggest money myth, and to really work with yourself internally on the feeling of enough, that is incredibly powerful medicine to hold around money. And I would say that the other myth is, I think where people get lost a lot, more than a myth, but where people kind of get sideways with money, is just around consumption and waste. Consumption and waste. It's like just beginning to be mindful of that in your day-to-day life. I'm not perfect at it. I still put some plastic in the trash every day, right? I live in America. It's really hard in our
Yeah.
country. But that if you can begin to be more mindful, like, we don't all need the new iPhone. I don't even the majority of my, like, clothes for, like, public speaking or work and all that, I just rent it. I don't need to own every outfit in the I don't need to have a big closet. My closet is, if you could see my arms, I could stretch my arms around my closet,
Wow, that's great. Because women get a
right?
little crazy, myself included.
Yeah, yeah, and the things like as women, like, I like to dress, and I like variety, and I like fun, and I like play, but there's entire industries now that let us share our closets with thousands of other women. You can share your purses, you can share your clothes, you can share your jewelry. Um, so, like, those kinds of things I think really help us to come into right relationship to money, because, like, the earth would like for us to not be so wasteful. There's
Mm,
no reason to be so wasteful. Like, we throw away so much food, and it drives me bonkers to see people drinking water out of a small plastic bottle. It
yeah.
drives me bonkers to see people in the pharmacy in front of me who get, like, one box of Tylenol, and they get a plastic bag and they put it in there. So this is not separate from money, because these are all resources of the planet and of Earth. And so to be in right relationship to the material is, I think, a potentiator in terms of the amount of abundance that we can create in our life.
So your clients, know about your shamanic background, the psychedelics, that you've used and benefited from. Have they all gone the psychedelic route as well, or a portion of them, or none of them?
No, no, because obviously it's not suitable for everybody. There are other ways to, because remember, what psychedelics are really doing is they're removing the veil between yourself and the divine is not separate from your soul, the Atman. So they're very powerful in terms of helping you to remove that veil. So if you even in clinical studies that are being done now for things like anxiety and depression, they have something that they use called the mystical scale. And the mystical scale is it's like a 1 to 10, like how deeply did you feel the presence of God? And people that score higher on the mystical scale have more better positively correlated outcomes for across the board for a host of things. So we know that that mystical experience is therapeutic. We know from the 12 steps that the divine is part of that therapeutic process. All psychedelics are doing is helping to they're giving a little wind underneath the sails of that experience. But so does breath work, so does meditation, so does nature. Like, there are many other ways to have that experience, and so no, not everyone is doing that work, who works with me, and anyone who is doing that work, it is still not legal in the US, and so this is work that has to be done in jurisdictions where we're permitted to work with such medicine. So, for example, you can work in Jamaica with psilocybin. It is completely legal to do that, and if you're going to work with ayahuasca. I encourage people to work with ayahuasca in Central and South America, in jurisdictions where this work is not underground.
How pleased are you or not with the progress MAPS has made?
So maps, first of all, I think Rick is a hero. You He takes the brunt of a lot of criticism, but is a very noble spirit. He has tremendous integrity, and he really was trying to bring his medicine out for the people, so that it wasn't just held in. He's a socialist when it comes to this. He wanted it to just be available, um, and really the FDA didn't approve just because there are really just two things that they had issue with in the studies, and both of those things will be rectified and amended, and I do think the FDA will approve MDMA in the next year to two. I think that we will see that. They have restructured MAPS, and there's renewed funding for that effort that has come from the private sector to help the approval to get over the finish line. And Rick is, in the meantime, he's really focusing on public policy and how to make changes in public policy that help to support good laws around the therapeutic use of all psychedelics.
Do you think that will be exclusively through an MD's approval, or will there be a separate kind of avenue that people could access it? And this is just your opinion or guess by what you might know about that.
I think it's going to depend on the what the therapeutic is. I would imagine MDMA will always have to have somebody has to write a prescription for that, right? So there's going to be some medical hand involved in that, whether that's somebody who's writing the script in conjunction with a trained therapist who then delivers the therapy. That might be the model. I'm not an expert on that. Psilocybin will have a very different playbook because psilocybin is following a decriminalization playbook, and it's probably going to look more state by state, going through that sort of decriminalized nature movement where um, people will have access to it in very similar ways to cannabis. And I don't, I think it's going to be state by state how they decide what a therapist needs to have or not to be able to legally work with psilocybin. And ketamine, as you know, is already being used legally, therapeutically, in clinical settings where there is a doctor who supervises the administration of the ketamine. Um, those are kind of the 3 that I think about the most. Obviously, you're gonna have, ayahuasca. I can't even imagine ayahuasca getting any kinda FDA approval anytime soon, and I have no idea how they're ever gonna figure out what's a facilitator who should be serving ayahuasca or not.
Well, Rick Perry recently talked about making Texas a safe space for ibogaine use because he saw what it's doing for military veterans and PTSD.
Yeah, I hope he has success in that endeavor, and that would be a game changer for so many people.
If you had a megaphone and the whole world was listening for the next minute, what would you say?
You're here to wake up. You're here to wake up, and you have one single precious lifetime to discover who you are, and don't waste it. You will regret it at the end of your life. So wake up.
And what are some
That's it.
clues that you're either on the right path or not on the right path? I imagine when you're on the right path, you kind of know it. But would you have any other tools for being aware of that?
Well, sometimes people say, "How do you know if you're in the presence of a good teacher or not?" And one of the great answers is you look at the community around the teacher. Is it a healthy, functioning community, or is it like some weird ass community where they're like walking around with
Mm.
like little dolls and like prayer beads and and only eating broccoli? So it's a great barometer of a teacher is to look at the community, and I think that that's true. Also, are you on the right path with yourself spiritually? Is look at who's around you. Like, how are your relationships? Like, how are your partnerships? How are all your relationships? Like, if you're on the right path, then my sense is that, your family is also on the right path. Like, we're not just healing ourselves, we're also healing the family. The family is the unit of a cohesive society. So look around you. How are your relationships? If you are surrounded by a lot of strong, intimate, authentic relationships, to me, you're on the right path.
Beautiful. How do you like to spend the first hour of your day? I know a lot of people consider that a really foundational uh, trend setting for the day. What do you like to do for the first hour of your day?
I've been on a rabbit hole around Dr. Jack Kruse's work. He's a fascinating neurosurgeon, and he talks about how the eye is a clock, and that our mitochondria are essentially batteries, and that we need to give the morning sunlight to our batteries, in the morning and in the evening. And so the first thing I do every morning is I take my dog for a walk, and I walk down to the water. I live close to the water here, and I just look at the sun, and I look right into that baby. When she's just coming up, I'm like all about the sun. And I just let my body fill with light and have some quality time with my puppy. And then I usually make a green juice, and my green juice is celery, cucumber, cilantro, lemon, and ginger. And that's how I start my day. And then usually after that, I go to Orange Theory. Shout out to Orange Theory. It's keeping my old bones strong.
Well, Sylvia, thank you so much for being with us here today. How do people find you? How would you like people to stay in touch with you?
You can go to thesylvia.com, and it's Sylvia with a Y. I have a newsletter that I put out twice a month, and I would love for your listeners to subscribe to the newsletter. It's free, and it's really just my way of staying connected with readers.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. And folks, please give us a comment on how this helped you. Click subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode of Next Level Healing.
Thank you.
This podcast is intended for the purpose of providing information and education. It does not provide advice and is not meant to be used for any self-diagnosis or the replacement of any kind of licensed professional. The creators and individuals appearing here do not endorse any specific tests, positions, medications, products, or procedures. The views and opinions are expressed in this podcast are of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.